7 a.m., coffee steam rising in morning air that smells like freedom after 20 years chasing federal criminals. I'm Agent Thorne Blackwood, FBI Financial Crimes, finally enjoying suburban peace. Then it happens. Slam, slam, slam! Open this door! You're in violation of community standards! This woman storms onto my porch like she owns the place. Bleached hair, designer everything, waving a leather portfolio like a weapon. Two cops behind her look like they'd rather be anywhere else. I open the door in my FBI Academy shirt. "Morning, officers. What's the issue?" She doesn't even see the shirt. "This criminal has ignored our legal notices for months. I'm Vivian Crestworth, HOA president, and I demand you arrest this man immediately." The cops notice my shirt. Their faces go pale. "Ma'am," I say with that special FBI calm, "you might want to choose your next words very carefully." She had no idea she'd just declared war on an entire family of federal agents. What would you do if some HOA tyrant tried to have you arrested at your own front door? Drop A if you've survived neighborhood dictators and tell me where you're watching from. Let me back up and explain how a 20-year FBI veteran ended up in a suburban Mexican standoff with an HOA tyrant who had absolutely no idea what kind of hornet's nest she was kicking. My name's Thorne Blackwood, and I've spent 2 decades hunting white-collar criminals for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Financial fraud, embezzlement, corruption. If someone's stealing money and thinks they're smarter than federal law enforcement, I'm the guy who ruins their day. After years of high-stress cases chasing criminals through offshore accounts and shell companies, my family and I finally found our slice of American dream in Ridgemont Estates. The house sits in what real estate agents call an executive community, 200 homes filled with federal employees, defense contractors, and retirees who value quiet streets and respect for constitutional law. Morning air carries the scent of fresh-cut grass mixed with coffee brewing on cedar decks, while suburban sprinklers create that rhythmic whisper that sounds like peace itself. Kids' bicycle bells echo off driveways where American flags flutter in gentle breezes that smell like freedom and possibility. My wife Carmen works DEA liaison, specializing in financial networks that fund drug operations. She's got this uncanny ability to follow money trails through labyrinths of shell companies that would make accountants weep. Our teenage daughter Phoenix inherited our investigative DNA but applies it to digital forensics and social media intelligence with the enthusiasm of someone who grew up speaking fluent internet. We moved here for tranquility. What we got was Vivian Crestworth. Imagine every HOA horror story crossed with a used car salesman who learned manipulation techniques from watching daytime television. Vivian's a former luxury real estate agent who lost her license for what the state diplomatically called misrepresentation of material facts to clients. Translation: she lied to people buying houses, got caught, and now channels her professional deception skills into community tyranny. She drives a spotless white Lexus that's never seen honest dirt, carries an oversized leather portfolio like she's closing Fortune 500 deals, and speaks in that saccharine customer service voice that makes dental work sound pleasant. She got herself elected HOA president by running unopposed. Apparently, nobody else wanted the thankless job of managing landscaping contracts and mediating neighbor disputes. Giving Vivian unchecked authority was like handing a kleptomaniac the keys to Fort Knox and expecting them to just dust the furniture. The war began 3 weeks after we settled in. I'd installed discreet security cameras around our property, professional-grade equipment that monitored only our own boundaries. After recent break-ins in surrounding neighborhoods, it seemed like basic home security common sense. That's when Vivian made her first tactical error, knocking on our door with a violation notice and the kind of smile that belongs in predator awareness training videos. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm sure this is just a silly misunderstanding," she purred, her voice coating threats in artificial sweetener. "But your surveillance equipment violates our updated community aesthetic standards and privacy expectations." The fine notice demanded $500 for unauthorized electronic surveillance systems, plus threats of daily accumulating penalties and potential property foreclosure if I didn't comply within 72 hours. The language was designed to intimidate people who didn't understand their rights. Ma'am, I said, producing the original HOA covenants I'd memorized before purchasing, there's nothing in these documents restricting security cameras on private property. Her plastic smile never wavered, but something predatory flickered behind those carefully applied false eyelashes. Oh, we recently updated those covenants. New standards for modern community living. 20 years chasing financial criminals teaches you to recognize con artists, and every instinct I developed was screaming fraud alert. The manufactured authority, the vague legal threats, the refusal to provide documentation, textbook intimidation tactics. When I asked to review the updated covenants, she claimed they were under legal review and would be available soon. Red flags so bright it could have guided aircraft. Carmen observed the entire interaction from our kitchen window, her DEA-trained instincts pinging danger signals. "Honey," she said after Vivian click-clacked away in designer heels, "that woman's running a con game. Everything about her screams desperation masquerading as authority." Phoenix looked up from her laptop, already conducting what she called basic reconnaissance. "Dad, her social media shows designer clothes, expensive vacations, luxury lifestyle, way beyond unemployed real estate agent budget." That evening, we made a family decision that would change everything. Treat this like any federal investigation. Document everything, analyze patterns, build an airtight case. We had no idea Vivian's desperation would drive her to commit federal crimes against the wrong family of federal agents. 3 days later, Vivian returned with what she grandly called expanded compliance documentation, essentially a PhD thesis in creative harassment with a minor in financial extortion. I was replacing our mailbox post. The old one had suffered mysterious overnight damage, probably from someone who thought federal employees made poor neighbors, when her pristine Lexus rolled into my driveway with the territorial authority of a conquering army claiming new territory. This time she brought artillery, a thick manila folder and an attitude that could have flash-frozen the surface of the sun. The morning air carried that perfect suburban symphony of dew on grass, coffee brewing in distant kitchens, and sprinklers whispering secrets to rose bushes. Vivian's arrival contaminated this peaceful scene like a diesel truck crashing a meditation retreat. "Mr. Blackwood," she announced with the theatrical gravity of someone delivering a death sentence, "I'm afraid your property violations have multiplied considerably." She consulted her folder like a prosecutor reading federal charges, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against paper with the rhythm of a death march. Apparently, my lawn height violated community standards, despite being identical to every other yard visible from space. Our outdoor furniture constituted excessive personal property display. We owned 2 chairs and a coffee table on our own deck. Most creatively, she'd classified my FBI vehicle as inappropriate commercial storage because it dared to exist in my own driveway. The fine total had metastasized to $200, accompanied by threats of property liens and foreclosure proceedings that read like they'd been written by someone who'd learned legal terminology from binge-watching Judge Judy. "Ma'am," I said, my FBI training keeping my voice calmer than a monastery library while my blood pressure approached levels that could power small aircraft. None of these alleged violations exist in the original HOA covenants. "As I've explained, we've modernized our standards to reflect contemporary community expectations," she replied with the condescending patience of someone explaining quantum physics to a goldfish. "I'd like to review those updated covenants. They're still under comprehensive legal review." Here's where 2 decades of hunting financial criminals became relevant. Knowledge nugget legitimate. HOA rule changes require majority homeowner approval plus proper state regulatory filing. Vivian's updated standards carried about as much legal weight as a chocolate teapot. That evening, I conducted what any federal investigator does when facing suspected fraud: systematic intelligence gathering. A casual neighborhood walk with Carmen revealed patterns that would have made any DEA financial analyst start drafting search warrants. Mrs. Patterson, our sweet retired librarian neighbor, had been slapped with a $300 fine for aesthetic non-compliance. Her heinous crime was growing tomatoes instead of decorative shrubs. The Hendricks family received citations for excessive recreational equipment storage. because their children's bicycles were visible in their own garage. Most revealing, Rebecca Martinez, a hardworking single mother juggling two jobs, got hammered with a $400 property maintenance violation during the exact week she was caring for her hospitalized mother. The targeting pattern was clearer than fingerprints on a murder weapon. Vivian systematically harassed specific demographics while ignoring identical or worse violations at other properties. Her own house featured an unauthorized fence extension that blatantly violated original covenants, plus a commercial landscaping truck permanently parked in her driveway like it was applying for residency. But here's where the investigation turned delicious. I ran basic background checks using publicly available records, the kind of research any motivated citizen can conduct online. What I discovered would have impressed financial crimes prosecutors nationwide. Multiple civil judgments for unpaid contractor services, foreclosure proceedings mysteriously withdrawn at the last second, credit card liens exceeding $30,000. Most damning, her real estate license revocation specifically cited misappropriation of client escrow funds, fancy language for stealing money from people buying houses. Carmen's DEA expertise provided the smoking gun when I showed her the financial timeline. Thorne, look at these dates. Every time she has major bills due, neighborhood violation activity spikes dramatically. She's not just power tripping, she's systematically fundraising through extortion. Phoenix's digital forensics sealed the case. Vivian's social media documented a luxury lifestyle completely inconsistent with her legitimate income sources. Designer clothes, five-star restaurants, weekend getaways to exclusive resorts, all apparently funded through systematic theft disguised as community governance. The mini-twist arrived when I contacted Find Neighbors about payment procedures. Mrs. Patterson had written her $300 check to Ridgemont Community Standards Fund. Rebecca was instructed to pay cash directly to Vivian for expedited processing. The Hendricks received Venmo payment instructions to avoid bureaucratic delays. None of these payments flowed through official HOA channels. Vivian was operating a personal extortion enterprise masquerading as legitimate community management. That night, our family convened what Phoenix dubbed a federal strategy summit around our kitchen table. Carmen's legendary chili filled the air with aromas that could broker international peace treaties while we outlined our approach to what was clearly evolving into a multi-jurisdictional federal case. So we're documenting embezzlement, extortion, mail fraud, and civil rights violations, Carmen summarized, stirring chili with the methodical precision of someone dismantling criminal enterprises. Don't forget selective enforcement based on protected demographics, I added. That triggers Federal Fair Housing Act jurisdiction. Phoenix looked up from her laptop with the expression of someone who'd just discovered buried treasure. And she's about to escalate massively. Her latest Facebook post announces a Community Standards Enforcement Summit this weekend. She's planning something big. We had no idea how prophetic Phoenix was. Vivian's next move would cross so many federal jurisdiction lines she'd basically paint a target on her back for every law enforcement agency in the alphabet soup. Vivian's Community Standards Enforcement Summit turned out to be less legal proceeding and more like watching someone's uncle perform Shakespeare after drinking too much wine at Thanksgiving dinner. Saturday morning arrived with that crisp autumn air that smells like possibility and pumpkin-spiced dreams. Instead of peace, it delivered Vivian's traveling circus of manufactured authority. Her pristine Lexus led a convoy that included one beat-up Honda Civic belching exhaust like an asthmatic dragon, disgorging a man in a wrinkled suit who looked like he'd learned legal practice from watching Judge Judy reruns in his underwear. The scent of fallen leaves and distant Saturday morning bacon should have created suburban paradise. Instead, Vivian's presence contaminated the atmosphere like a septic tank explosion at a garden party. "Mr. Blackwood," she announced with the theatrical gravity of someone declaring war on Switzerland, "I brought our HOA legal counsel to discuss your escalating violations and the serious federal consequences of continued defiance." The alleged attorney stepped forward with all the commanding presence of a wet paper towel. "I'm Bradley Crestworth, Esquire, representing Ridgemont Estates Homeowners Association in this matter of willful covenant destruction and community terrorism." Crestworth, same surname as Vivian. My FBI fraud radar started screaming louder than smoke detectors in a house fire. Mr. Crestworth, I said, channeling my best federal interrogation voice, what's your state bar number and which jurisdiction admitted you to practice law? His confidence evaporated faster than ice cream in hell. Well, that is to say, I specialize in HOA legal consultation rather than traditional courtroom representation. Translation, he wasn't a lawyer, just Vivian's unemployed relative with delusions of legal competence and a suit from 1987. Carmen, observing from our window, was probably already conducting background checks that would make his head spin. Mr. Blackwood, Vivian continued, apparently deciding to bulldoze through the fake lawyer revelation like it was a minor speed bump. You now face immediate foreclosure proceedings, permanent credit destruction, and potential federal criminal charges for theft of community resources. Theft of community resources? Your continued occupation of community property while refusing to pay legally assessed penalties constitutes grand theft under state and federal statutes. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. According to Vivian's legal theory, we were committing grand theft by living in our own house and breathing community air. But here's where Bradley, definitely not a squire, made the mistake that would haunt their dreams. He handed me what he claimed was an official federal legal demand, requiring immediate payment of all fines plus $500 in legal processing fees and $300 in federal consultation charges. Knowledge nugget, using the postal system to deliver fraudulent legal threats constitutes federal mail fraud, carrying penalties up to 20 years in prison regardless of dollar amounts. Bradley had just escalated their neighborhood harassment into federal felony territory. That afternoon, I conducted the kind of systematic investigation that makes white-collar criminals lose sleep. Carmen contributed her DEA expertise in financial crime pattern recognition, while Phoenix deployed digital forensic skills that would have impressed cybercrime units. Our findings painted a picture clearer than HD television. Every family Vivian targeted shared specific demographics: federal employees, single mothers, elderly residents, or racial minorities. Meanwhile, her social circle, exclusively white, affluent, and well-connected, somehow never received violations despite flagrant covenant violations visible from orbital satellites. Carmen's financial analysis revealed criminal patterns that would have made prosecutors weep with joy. Thorne, look at this correlation. Mrs. Patterson's fine payment coincided exactly with Vivian's credit card company filing collection actions. Rebecca's cash payment happened the same day Vivian's mortgage payment was due. She's basically using HOA fines as her personal ATM machine. Phoenix's digital investigation provided the coup de grace. Dad Bradley's LinkedIn profile is comedy gold. He's not a lawyer. He's Vivian's chronically unemployed brother-in-law who sells insurance part-time and drives for Uber on weekends. His highest education is an associate degree in business from a community college that closed for academic fraud. The mini-twist arrived when I contacted the State Bar Association for credential verification. Not only was Bradley unlicensed, but impersonating an attorney constituted multiple state and federal felonies. Using fake legal credentials to extort citizens? That's the kind of federal crime that makes prosecutors smile in their sleep. But Vivian wasn't finished destroying her own life. That evening, she embarked on a door-to-door campaign spreading what she called community safety alerts about our family. According to Mrs. Patterson, who called immediately, Vivian was telling neighbors we were dangerous rogue federal agents who brought criminal surveillance operations into their peaceful suburban sanctuary. The irony was thicker than concrete. The only criminal surveillance in Ridgemont Estates was Phoenix monitoring Vivian's increasingly unhinged social media posts. Carmen's law enforcement instincts triggered full alarm mode when we analyzed Vivian's escalation trajectory. She's entering desperation phase, which makes her exponentially more dangerous. Desperate criminals make increasingly stupid decisions. Phoenix, conducting real-time social media monitoring, confirmed our worst fears. She's planning something nuclear. Her Facebook posts are getting more paranoid, and she's been messaging people from other states asking about federal agent infiltration problems. That night, I made a decision that would alter everything. I contacted my FBI supervisor, not to initiate official investigation, but to document federal employee harassment and ensure proper protocols if the situation exploded into federal crime territory. Thorne, my supervisor said after reviewing the evidence summary, this is textbook mail fraud and civil rights violations. Continue documenting, but be extremely careful. People who impersonate lawyers usually don't stop at impersonating lawyers. His warning proved prophetic. Vivian and Bradley were about to escalate into activities that would trigger automatic federal prosecution. Tuesday morning delivered the kind of escalation that transforms suburban disputes into federal investigations faster than you can say career-ending stupidity. I was installing a new security light. The irony wasn't lost on me that I needed protection from the person supposedly protecting community standards when 3 vehicles descended on our driveway with the precision of a SWAT raid. Vivian's immaculate Lexus led this parade of manufactured crisis, followed by a sheriff's patrol car and what appeared to be a city code enforcement truck that had seen better decades. The morning air should have carried peaceful sense of coffee brewing and autumn leaves crunching. Instead, tension hung thick enough to slice with a chainsaw while Vivian emerged wearing what could only be described as her courtroom drama outfit, a power suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, topped with a smile that belonged in a serial killer documentary. "Officers," she called out with the theatrical urgency of someone reporting alien invasion, "this is the rogue federal agent I warned you about. He's been making explicit threats about using government resources to destroy anyone who dares enforce legitimate community standards." Sheriff Deputy Martinez, ironically a guy I'd collaborated with on a joint federal-local financial crimes task force just 6 months earlier, looked about as enthusiastic as someone attending their own root canal. "Mr. Blackwood, we've received serious allegations about threatening behavior toward community officials." "Deputy Martinez," I said, recognizing him instantly. "What specific threats am I alleged to have made?" Vivian pounced before he could respond, apparently having rehearsed this performance. He explicitly stated he would weaponize his federal database access to make community leaders disappear from government systems. He claimed he could destroy our credit, our security clearances, our very existence through federal retaliation. The sheer creative audacity was breathtaking. I'd never discussed federal authority with Vivian beyond asking for legitimate documentation, but her fabricated threats revealed both criminal intent and catastrophic legal ignorance. Knowledge nugget: filing false police reports involving alleged federal employee misconduct triggers federal obstruction of justice charges, carrying penalties up to 5 years in federal prison. Vivian had just graduated from local nuisance to federal felon faster than a community college dropout. Deputy Martinez, who knew my professional reputation and ethical standards, displayed obvious skepticism. "Mrs. Crestworth, do you have recordings, witnesses, or documentation of these alleged threats?" "Well, no direct recordings, but my legal counsel Bradley witnessed several suspicious conversations about federal authority abuse." Bradley, lurking behind her like an awkward understudy, nodded with all the conviction of someone lying under oath while being filmed. Meanwhile, the code enforcement officer had been conducting his property inspection with the enthusiasm of someone who'd rather be cleaning sewers. After 15 minutes of thorough examination, he approached with palpable reluctance. "Ma'am, I've completed comprehensive assessment, 0 code violations detected, security equipment is compliant, landscaping exceeds standards, all structures properly permitted and maintained." Vivian's face cycled through more colors than a kaleidoscope having seizures. "That's impossible. Re-inspect everything. There must be violations somewhere." "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 18 years. This property could win neighborhood improvement awards." "See?" Here's where Vivian committed the mistake that would provide prosecutors with gift-wrapped evidence. She whipped out her smartphone and started recording what she announced as documentation of systematic federal corruption infiltrating local government. "I'm live-streaming evidence of this conspiracy between rogue federal agents and corrupted local officials to obstruct legitimate community law enforcement," she declared to her phone camera. apparently broadcasting to Facebook with the confidence of someone who'd never heard of federal cybercrime statutes. She'd just filmed herself making false accusations of federal corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction, all federal felonies when involving fabricated evidence and malicious prosecution attempts. Carmen, observing this train wreck from inside, chose this perfect moment to step onto our porch wearing her official DEA jacket. Phoenix joined her, laptop in hand, grinning like someone who'd just discovered buried treasure in their backyard. "Deputy Martinez," Carmen said with that unmistakable DEA command presence, "I trust you're thoroughly documenting this systematic harassment campaign. Mrs. Crestworth has been conducting organized intimidation against multiple federal employee families in this community." Vivian's livestream apparently attracted considerable attention because her phone erupted with notifications. Phoenix, reading comments over her shoulder, started laughing like someone watching the world's best comedy show. "Mom, this is incredible. She's getting comments from people in California, Arizona, and Texas who recognize her from identical harassment campaigns. She's like the Johnny Appleseed of HOA terrorism." The mini twist that shattered everything came when Deputy Martinez's radio crackled with dispatch updates. Deputy Martinez were receiving multiple additional complaints about Mrs. Crestworth, 9 families reporting identical harassment patterns, systematic targeting, fraudulent fee collection. 9 families. Vivian hadn't just targeted us. She'd been conducting a military-style campaign against federal employees, elderly residents, single mothers, and minorities throughout Ridgemont Estates. Deputy Martinez's demeanor transformed from reluctant mediator to active criminal investigator. "Mrs. Crestworth, you need to accompany me to the station for questioning regarding multiple harassment complaints and possible fraud charges." "This is a federal conspiracy," Vivian shrieked, her carefully constructed facade finally imploding like a controlled demolition. "You're all collaborating against me because I'm the only one brave enough to expose federal agent infiltration of our peaceful community." Federal infiltration. She just accused multiple law enforcement agencies of criminal conspiracy while live-streaming to an audience that included people from multiple states documenting her previous identical criminal behavior. That evening, our family conducted what Phoenix dubbed an evidence festival around our kitchen table. Carmen's legendary beef stew filled the air with aromas that could end international conflicts while we organized documentation that now required industrial-strength filing systems. Mail fraud, false police reports, obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, impersonating attorneys, and systematic extortion, Carmen cataloged with the precision of someone who'd built federal cases that put people away for decades. "Plus conspiracy charges for Bradley," I added. "He's complicit in every fraudulent scheme." Phoenix looked up from her laptop with the expression of someone who'd just cracked the Da Vinci Code. "And I've documented her identical operations in 4 different states over 6 years. This isn't harassment, it's her criminal business model." We couldn't have predicted that Vivian's desperation would drive her to actions requiring federal witness protection protocols and generating headlines that would make national news. Thursday afternoon delivered the kind of discovery that transforms neighborhood disputes into federal cases faster than you can say organized criminal enterprise. I was reviewing evidence files at my kitchen table, the smell of Carmen's fresh coffee mixing with the crisp scent of autumn air drifting through open windows, when Phoenix burst in with the expression of someone who'd just cracked the Zodiac killer case using nothing but Wi-Fi and teenage determination. "Dad, Mom, you need to see this immediately. Vivian isn't just a neighborhood psychopath. She's a professional criminal running a multi-state operation." Carmen looked up from her DEA financial analysis spreadsheets, raising an eyebrow with the skepticism of someone who'd heard bold claims before. "Phoenix, define multi-state operation." Phoenix opened her laptop with the theatrical flair of someone about to reveal government secrets. "Vivian Crestworth has operated identical HOA extortion schemes in 6 different states over the past 7 years. California, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, Nevada, and now Montana. Same methods, same targeting patterns, same exit strategy when legal pressure builds." The timeline Phoenix had constructed looked like something from a federal criminal profile. "Move to upscale community with high federal employee population." Run for HOA office unopposed because nobody else wants the job. Implement unauthorized rule changes without proper homeowner approval. Target specific demographics, federal employees, elderly residents, single mothers, minorities, with fabricated violations. Collect fraudulent fees through various payment schemes, liquidate assets, and relocate when authorities investigate. It's not random harassment, Phoenix continued, scrolling through social media evidence that would have impressed FBI cybercrime units. She specifically researches communities before moving there, identifying weak HOA oversight and high concentrations of federal employees. Carmen's financial investigation provided the smoking gun. Phoenix is right. Look at these bank records I found through public liens and court filings. Every time she faces legal pressure, there's a pattern. Sudden asset liquidation, cross-state money transfers, then immediate relocation to a new target community. Knowledge nugget: crossing state lines to commit mail fraud and extortion transforms local crimes into federal RICO predicate offenses, carrying penalties up to 20 years plus complete asset forfeiture. Vivienne had accidentally constructed a federal racketeering case against herself. The financial scope was staggering. Carmen's analysis showed systematic theft totaling over $150,000 from various communities and individual families. But the targeting pattern revealed something more sinister than simple greed. She specifically hunts federal law enforcement families, Carmen explained, pointing to demographic data that painted a disturbing picture. FBI, DEA, ATF, Border Patrol, federal prosecutors. She targets people whose professional ethics prevent them from using federal authority in personal disputes. Phoenix had discovered the most damning evidence through cross-referencing court records with social media posts. Look at her Facebook check-ins and travel patterns. Every move coincides with federal law enforcement community relocations. She's following federal employee families like a predator stalking prey. The sophistication was breathtaking. Vivienne had developed detailed profiles of federal agencies, typical housing allowances, common relocation patterns, even specific training facilities where federal families often relocate afterward. Her targeting wasn't opportunistic, it was strategic. But here's the really scary part, Phoenix said, pulling up communication records that made our blood run cold. She's been in contact with people from her previous locations, not victims, accomplices. This isn't a one-person operation. Carmen's law enforcement instincts kicked into overdrive. She's built a network, multiple operators running identical schemes in different regions, sharing intelligence about federal employee movements and vulnerable communities. The revelation hit like a physical blow. We weren't dealing with an unhinged neighbor. We were facing a sophisticated criminal organization that had developed federal law enforcement families into a business model. We need to contact federal authorities tonight, I decided, reaching for my secure phone. This has escalated beyond local fraud into organized criminal enterprise territory. But first we had to protect our neighbors, who were still being victimized while Vivienne continued operating her criminal scheme right under our noses. What started as an HOA dispute had revealed a criminal network specifically designed to exploit the people who dedicate their lives to protecting America. Friday morning transformed our suburban kitchen into what Phoenix enthusiastically dubbed Federal Command Central, a war room that would have made Pentagon strategists jealous and definitely voided our homeowners insurance policy regarding the storage of potentially explosive evidence. The rich aroma of Carmen's nuclear-strength coffee mingled with crisp autumn air flowing through windows we'd strategically opened for operational security. Translation: we needed oxygen to think clearly about dismantling a criminal enterprise that had been operating under federal law enforcement's collective nose like a particularly audacious pickpocket at a police convention. I'd contacted my FBI supervisor at dawn, not to initiate official investigation, but to report what appeared to be organized criminal activity specifically targeting federal employees. Within hours, our Maple dining table hosted an informal interagency coordination meeting that would have impressed NATO commanders and terrified our neighbors if they'd known what we were planning. Carmen brought her DEA financial crimes expertise along with coffee strong enough to wake the constitutionally deceased. Phoenix contributed digital forensics skills that made seasoned cybercrime agents feel simultaneously proud and prehistoric. I provided FBI white-collar methodology and 2 decades of experience building cases that survive federal court scrutiny. Phase 1, I announced, spreading evidence across our table like a general planning the invasion of Normandy, systematic documentation of Vivian's current criminal operation while protecting ongoing victims from additional harm. Carmen consulted financial analysis spreadsheets that looked like something from a prosecutor's fever dreams. I've tracked her money laundering back 18 months. Every fraudulent fine correlates perfectly with personal expenses, credit card payments, mortgage installments, luxury shopping sprees. She's essentially living off embezzled community funds like some kind of suburban financial vampire. Phoenix had constructed what she modestly called a digital evidence fortress. Comprehensive preservation of social media posts, financial records, court filings, and communication patterns following federal evidentiary standards that would make seasoned prosecutors weep tears of pure joy. Knowledge nugget: multi-jurisdictional fraud cases require evidence preservation following federal chain of custody protocols to ensure admissibility across different court systems. Phoenix had basically gift-wrapped a federal case that prosecutors could present blindfolded. Phase 2, Carmen continued, consulting battle plans that resembled something from a military academy textbook, coordinate simultaneous law enforcement response across multiple jurisdictions without alerting the target. The coordination strategy was beautiful in its elegant simplicity. Local authorities would handle immediate charges, false police reports, fraud, impersonating legal counsel. State attorneys general would pursue consumer protection violations and interstate fraud patterns. Federal prosecutors would develop RICO charges for organized criminal enterprise spanning multiple states. We need victim testimony from previous locations, I decided, reviewing Phoenix's research identifying targets across 6 states. RICO prosecutions require demonstrating ongoing criminal enterprise patterns. Phoenix was already miles ahead, having used social media archaeology and public records mining to identify previous victims nationwide. I've located contact information for 47 families across 6 states who survived identical harassment schemes. Several were federal employees who never reported because they worried about workplace complications or security clearance issues. The pattern was simultaneously heartbreaking and infuriating. Federal agents trained to handle international terrorists and organized crime syndicates had been systematically victimized by a suburban scammer because their professional ethics prevented using federal authority in personal disputes. Phase 3, Carmen announced with the satisfaction of someone who'd dismantled drug cartels using spreadsheets and righteous indignation, victim protection protocols while preserving federal case integrity. The protection strategy balanced immediate community needs with prosecutorial requirements. Mrs. Patterson and elderly victims needed financial counseling and legal assistance. Federal employee families required security assessments and workplace notification. Single mothers like Rebecca needed immediate harassment relief and financial recovery assistance. Phoenix had organized what she called a neighborhood resistance network, secure communication channels for reporting incidents, digital evidence training for community members, and coordination with targeted families who'd been suffering in silence. Technical knowledge nugget: federal RICO cases require demonstrating ongoing criminal enterprise, which sometimes means allowing monitored criminal activity to continue for pattern evidence. We had to balance victim protection with case-building requirements like some kind of legal tightrope act. Phase 4, I concluded, strategic revelation timing for maximum community protection and optimal federal prosecution success. Timing was absolutely critical. Move too quickly and Vivian might destroy evidence or flee to terrorize another community. Move too slowly and additional families would suffer financial devastation and emotional trauma. Federal prosecutors needed coordination time across multiple jurisdictions while avoiding statute of limitations complications. Carmen's DEA experience provided the perfect solution. Controlled revelation strategy: monitor current operations while building federal case, then coordinate simultaneous multi-state enforcement action to prevent flight and evidence destruction. Phoenix looked up from her laptop fortress with the triumphant grin of someone who'd just solved quantum physics using YouTube tutorials. And I've identified the perfect trigger event. She's organizing a community standards enforcement summit next Tuesday. Final intimidation campaign before winter, probably targeting the most vulnerable families for maximum financial extraction before heating bills arrive. That evening, organizing evidence that now required industrial filing systems and multiple digital storage devices, I realized we weren't just building a criminal case. We were protecting federal law enforcement families who dedicated their lives to serving others, only to be systematically victimized by someone who'd transformed their service into criminal opportunity. The irony was thicker than Carmen's chili. Federal agents using their training to protect themselves and their community from the exact kind of predator they'd sworn to stop. Monday morning delivered Vivian's nuclear option, a desperate escalation so spectacularly misguided it would have impressed criminal masterminds if they weren't too busy laughing at the stupidity. I was reviewing federal evidence protocols over breakfast that smelled like possibility and fresh-ground optimism when Carmen's secure DEA phone erupted with the urgency of someone reporting imminent zombie apocalypse. The caller ID showed her unit supervisor, which at 7 a.m. on a Monday usually meant either international drug cartel emergencies or someone had committed career-ending stupidity. Agent Blackwood, her supervisor's voice carried through the speaker with the tone of someone delivering terminal diagnosis news. We've received extremely serious allegations regarding your family's conduct in your residential community. My coffee suddenly tasted like liquid anxiety mixed with dread. Carmen activated speaker mode while Phoenix looked up from her laptop fortress with the expression of someone watching a particularly spectacular train derailment. What specific allegations, sir? Someone identifying herself as Community Standards Enforcement President has filed formal federal complaints alleging your family is conducting unauthorized surveillance operations, intimidating civilian populations, and systematically abusing federal authority for personal vendettas against law-abiding citizens. The audacity was breathtaking. Vivian had escalated beyond neighborhood harassment into federal bureaucracy warfare, apparently believing that flooding agencies with paperwork would somehow transform her from criminal defendant into patriotic whistleblower. The aroma of bacon from neighbors' kitchens mixed with the sudden scent of career anxiety as we comprehended the scope of her latest tactical nuclear strike. "Sir, these allegations are completely fabricated," Carmen explained with the professional calm of someone who'd interrogated cartel assassins without breaking composure. "We're actually documenting systematic criminal harassment by the complainant herself." But Vivian's rampage was just beginning. Phoenix's real-time social media monitoring revealed she'd launched what could only be described as a propaganda blitzkrieg across every platform that would accept her increasingly unhinged content. Facebook manifestos claiming our family operated illegal federal surveillance networks, terrorizing peaceful suburban patriots. Twitter threads alleging rogue government agents were systematically destroying constitutional rights. Instagram stories featuring dramatic photos of our house with captions about federal tyranny in residential America. The irony was thicker than Carmen's legendary chili, a systematic criminal harasser accusing law enforcement families of harassment while literally committing federal crimes on live social media. "Holy cannoli, Dad," Phoenix said, scrolling through social media with the fascination of someone documenting natural disasters. She's tagged every news station in Montana, 3 national networks, and apparently every anti-government conspiracy group with internet access. She's trying to weaponize the entire internet against us. Our phones started ringing like election night at campaign headquarters. Carmen's DEA colleagues, my FBI liaison contacts, federal supervisors from agencies I'd never heard of, everyone wanted explanations for the concerning reports regarding federal employee misconduct in civilian communities. Vivian had essentially carpet-bombed federal bureaucracy with complaints, apparently believing that quantity would somehow overcome quality, evidence, or basic sanity. It was like trying to extinguish fires using napalm but with more paperwork and federal investigation protocols. Knowledge nugget: filing multiple false complaints against federal employees constitutes federal obstruction of justice, interference with federal operations, and conspiracy to impede lawful government functions. Vivian had committed approximately 17 federal felonies while trying to avoid prosecution for her existing federal crimes. The mini twist that transformed everything arrived when my FBI supervisor called with news that made our situation simultaneously better and infinitely more bureaucratically complicated. Thorne, her complaints triggered mandatory background investigation protocols, which means we investigated everyone involved. Here's the fascinating part. Our background check revealed the complainant is currently wanted in 3 states, under federal investigation in 2 others, and appears to be operating organized criminal enterprise specifically targeting federal law enforcement families. Federal bureaucracy had accidentally functioned perfectly. Vivian's complaints had triggered comprehensive background investigations revealing her multi-state criminal history, outstanding arrest warrants, and the uncomfortable fact that she was already federal law enforcement's problem child in multiple jurisdictions. But Vivian's desperation was metastasizing into increasingly dangerous behavior. That afternoon, she organized what she grandly announced as a community liberation rally at the public library, promoting it through social media as exposing federal agent corruption poisoning suburban America. Phoenix's covert surveillance through live streams was simultaneously hilarious and deeply concerning. Vivian had attracted exactly 9 people to her emergency community liberation meeting, including 4 reporters who seemed more interested in her psychological state than any legitimate journalism. "Fellow patriots," Vivian proclaimed to her pathetic audience with the dramatic intensity of someone announcing alien invasion, "we are witnessing systematic federal governmental tyranny designed to silence courageous Americans who dare enforce traditional community values against foreign infiltration." The reporters started asking inconvenient questions about evidence, documentation, and specific criminal allegations. Vivian's responses became increasingly frantic and contradictory, apparently forgetting that actual journalists occasionally verify claims before publication. When pressed for concrete evidence, she provided conspiracy theories. When asked for documentation, she cited ongoing legal proceedings. When asked for witness testimony, she referenced Bradley, who'd apparently developed sudden amnesia about wanting federal prison experience. That evening, our family conducted what Phoenix dubbed a Federal Crisis Management Summit, while Carmen's stress cooking filled our kitchen with aromas that could negotiate international peace treaties. "She's completely psychologically decompensated," Carmen observed, reviewing media coverage that made Vivian appear like someone escaped from psychiatric evaluation. "Desperate criminals make exponentially worse decisions," Phoenix grinned like someone watching fireworks finale. "Best part? Every false federal complaint she's filed is now evidence of obstruction and conspiracy. She's building federal prosecutors' cases faster than they could dream." Wednesday delivered Vivian's final apocalyptic gambit, a scheme so catastrophically unhinged it would have impressed international terrorists if they weren't too busy taking notes on how not to commit federal crimes 101. I was reviewing evidence protocols over morning coffee that smelled like victory and common sense when Phoenix exploded into our kitchen with the expression of someone who'd just witnessed a methane explosion at a dairy farm. The crisp autumn air should have carried peaceful scents of coffee brewing and leaves crunching, but Phoenix's news contaminated our suburban serenity like a toxic waste spill at a children's playground. "Dad, Mom, she's completely severed all connections with reality. Vivian just filed emergency restraining orders against our entire family, claiming we're operating a federal domestic terrorism cell designed to infiltrate and destroy patriotic American communities." Carmen nearly launched her coffee through our kitchen window, the industrial-strength brew that could wake hibernating bears and federal judges. "She filed restraining orders against active federal agents?" "Oh, it gets exponentially worse," Phoenix continued, scrolling through her digital command center with the morbid fascination of someone documenting civilization's collapse. "She's claiming we're running an illegal federal witness protection safe house for foreign agents and criminal informants that poses immediate existential threats to national security and community safety." The sheer audacity was so breathtaking it deserved its own entry in meteorological record books. Vivian had apparently decided that if modest lies weren't effective, she'd attempt lies so monumentally absurd they'd collapse into black holes and consume nearby galaxies. But wait, there's significantly more, as they announce in late-night infomercials selling products that violate multiple laws of physics. Phoenix's real-time surveillance revealed Vivian had hired what she proclaimed was professional security consultation to defend innocent Americans from federal occupation forces. 3 men wearing surplus military costumes had established an armed checkpoint at our neighborhood entrance, demanding identification from residents and claiming authority under community emergency defense protocols. She's essentially declared martial law in suburban Montana, Carmen observed with the tone of someone who'd witnessed cartel territorial wars but never suburban ones. This is either the most elaborate federal suicide attempt in recorded history, or she's achieved complete psychological break from observable reality. The professional security proved to be mercenaries from a company specializing in what their website diplomatically called civilian protection services, translation military rejects who couldn't pass background checks for actual law enforcement, but owned impressive collections of tactical cosplay equipment and delusions of competence. Knowledge nugget: hiring armed personnel to detain federal employees or obstruct federal operations constitutes federal kidnapping, conspiracy, and domestic terrorism charges carrying life imprisonment. Vivian had just escalated from financial fraud to potential life sentence territory. The mini-twist that transformed our federal case into federal emergency occurred when one of Vivian's tactical cosplayers attempted to detain Carmen returning from her DEA office. According to the incident report that would later become Exhibit A in federal terrorism prosecution, the security consultant demanded to search her vehicle for contraband surveillance equipment and federal weapons caches, while claiming authority under community self-defense emergency powers. Carmen, being a DEA agent with extensive tactical training and absolutely zero tolerance for amateur hour intimidation attempts, responded with what she diplomatically described as appropriate professional courtesy, meaning she had the wannabe soldier face down on asphalt with zip-tie restraints before he completed his demands for identification. "Sweetheart," Carmen called from her cell phone while standing over a subdued mercenary who was reconsidering his career choices, "we have a federal incident requiring immediate tactical response. Vivian's hired muscle just attempted to kidnap a federal agent." Federal response materialized with the efficiency of people who consider threats against federal employees to be career-limiting moves for the threateners. FBI tactical teams, DEA enforcement units, ATF agents, and enough federal firepower to liberate medium-sized nations converged on Ridgemont Estates faster than Phoenix could livestream the scene. Watching federal tactical vehicles parade through our peaceful suburban streets was surreal, like witnessing a military invasion of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. The acrid smell of diesel exhaust from government vehicles mixed with autumn pine scents, while neighbors emerged from houses wearing expressions typically reserved for UFO sightings and natural disasters. Vivian's response to federal law enforcement arrival was to barricade herself inside her house and broadcast what she called documentation of federal tyranny against patriotic Americans, while claiming the tactical response validated her allegations about our family's dangerous federal terrorist connections. The irony was Kitty, thick enough to construct federal buildings. She'd spent weeks insisting we were dangerous federal agents, then expressed shocked indignation when her actions attracted actual dangerous federal agent response. Phoenix, documenting everything from our front porch like a war correspondent covering suburban Armageddon, provided commentary that would later become federal court evidence. She's literally confessing to federal crimes on Facebook Live, while federal agents arrest her accomplices for federal crimes she hired them to commit. The mercenaries, confronted with genuine federal agents instead of suburban families they'd expected to intimidate, surrendered faster than surrender speed records. Their tactical equipment proved to be mostly paintball gear and Halloween costume accessories purchased from military surplus stores and Amazon. The spectacular finale arrived when Vivian emerged from her house clutching what appeared to be a handwritten manifesto, demanding audience with independent media representatives to expose systematic federal corruption destroying American democracy. Instead, she encountered FBI agents reading Miranda rights while news helicopters circled overhead like media vultures documenting particularly spectacular roadkill. Mrs. Vivian Crestworth, the lead FBI agent, announced with authority typically reserved for arresting international war criminals, "You're under federal arrest for conspiracy, domestic terrorism, obstruction of federal operations, and approximately 19 additional federal charges we'll discuss at the federal detention facility." That evening, our family gathered on our front porch watching final federal vehicles depart, while local news crews interviewed shell-shocked neighbors about what reporters called the most spectacularly destructive HOA dispute in Montana state history. "Well," Phoenix said with satisfaction typically reserved for completing doctoral dissertations, "I'm predicting her restraining order application might face some procedural challenges." Bye. Friday evening transformed our suburban community center into what CNN would later call the most explosively dramatic public meeting in American HOA history, complete with federal agents, national media, and enough courtroom-quality drama to power Netflix series for decades. The community center practically vibrated with electricity you could taste on your tongue, mixing the rich aroma of industrial-strength coffee with nervous perspiration and the kind of anticipation usually reserved for Super Bowl championships or public executions of particularly despised dictators. Every seat was occupied by neighbors who'd survived systematic terrorism. People lined walls like witnesses to historical events, and overflow crowds spilled into the parking lot, where satellite trucks clustered like technological vultures documenting spectacular justice. At the front table sat our new interim HOA leadership, Mrs. Patterson radiating librarian dignity, Rebecca Martinez representing single mother survivors, and three other neighbors who'd volunteered to excavate the wreckage Vivian had left behind. Behind them, federal prosecutors arranged evidence binders with the methodical precision of people who'd built cases that dismantled international crime syndicates. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen approached the podium with the commanding presence of someone who'd testified before Senate committees about organized crime. The room fell silent except for camera shutters clicking like digital applause and the nervous shuffle of 200 people suddenly realizing they'd been living adjacent to federal case material. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Chen announced with courtroom authority, "what began as neighborhood harassment revealed a sophisticated multi-state criminal enterprise specifically targeting federal law enforcement families." She activated presentation screens showing financial evidence that made the audience gasp collectively. Charts documenting $180,000 in systematic theft across 6 states, targeting methodologies that revealed professional criminal sophistication and coordination networks spanning multiple jurisdictions. Mrs. Vivian Crestworth, currently in federal detention awaiting trial, operated organized extortion schemes for 7 years, methodically victimizing federal employees, elderly residents, and single mothers through fraudulent authority claims. The crowd murmured with the sound of people processing how extensively they'd been manipulated by someone masquerading as community leadership. But the real drama erupted when Agent Chen revealed Vivian's spectacular final criminal acts. Mrs. Crestworth's hiring of armed mercenaries to detain federal agents escalated charges to include domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and federal weapons violations. Her actions endangered not just targeted families, but transformed this peaceful community into potential combat zone. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand with the trembling courage of someone who'd survived decades of community politics and teenage library patrons. "Agent Chen, what happens to the money she stole from our neighbors?" Federal asset forfeiture recovered $127,000 from bank accounts, luxury purchases, and property sales. These funds will be distributed proportionally to documented victims across all affected communities. Rebecca Martinez stood with tears streaming down her face, but voice strong with survivor determination. "I paid her $400 I desperately needed for groceries because she threatened to have my children removed if I didn't comply immediately. I was terrified to report it because she seemed to have real governmental authority." Her emotional testimony triggered something powerful throughout the room. Other families began sharing stories that painted a picture of systematic psychological warfare, elderly neighbors terrorized into paying fraudulent fines, federal employees harassed for their service, single mothers targeted for their vulnerability. Agent Chen's professional demeanor softened with genuine compassion. Mrs. Crestworth's methodology specifically exploited your trust in legitimate authority and respect for community leadership. She weaponized your civic responsibility against you. The moment that would dominate national headlines arrived when a CNN reporter asked the question everyone was contemplating. Agent Blackwood, critics might say federal agents used government training against a civilian neighbor. How do you respond? I stood, feeling the focused attention of 200 neighbors, and knowing my response would define how this story would be remembered by history. The weight of representing not just my family, but federal employees nationwide settled on my shoulders like a responsibility I'd never requested but was uniquely qualified to carry. We didn't use federal authority against a neighbor, I said, my voice carrying across the silent room with crystalline clarity. We used federal training to protect our neighbors from someone who was systematically destroying our community. The spontaneous applause erupted like volcanic emotion, lasting nearly 2 minutes while cameras captured neighbors embracing and wiping tears from faces that hadn't cried since childhood funerals. When the applause subsided, Carmen stood beside me with DEA confidence radiating like protective armor. Real authority serves communities. Vivian's authority terrorized communities. We're honored to live among neighbors who stood together against systematic abuse. Phoenix, never missing opportunities for teenage wisdom that embarrasses parents and impresses adults, delivered the line that would become internet famous. Maybe next time someone claims to have authority over you, ask to see their badge instead of your checkbook. The mic drop moment arrived when Agent Chen announced Vivian's ultimate fate. Mrs. Crestworth faces 63 federal charges across 7 jurisdictions. Maximum possible sentence, life in federal prison without parole. Her accomplices accepted plea agreements and are providing evidence against similar operations nationwide. Mrs. Patterson rose with the dignity of someone who'd witnessed wars, survived depressions, and endured decades of community service. On behalf of every family Vivian victimized, we thank the Blackwoods for protecting us when we didn't realize we needed protection. The standing ovation that followed lasted 7 minutes, captured by national media as neighbors hugged strangers, elderly residents wept with relief, and a community celebrated justice triumphing over systematic oppression. Outside, as satellite trucks departed and neighbors lingered sharing contact information and recovery stories, I realized we documented something historically significant: federal training serving community protection instead of government authority. 6 months later, Ridgemont Estates had metamorphosed from a community terrorized by systematic criminal harassment into what Suburban Living magazine featured as America's model federal employee neighborhood, a distinction that made us simultaneously swell with pride and cringe at becoming poster children for suburban justice. Vivienne Crestworth received 45 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges that read like a criminal law textbook: RICO conspiracy, mail fraud, extortion, domestic terrorism, and impersonating legal authority. Her accomplice, brother-in-law Bradley, earned 18 months for attorney impersonation and conspiracy. Both faced restitution orders totaling $340,000, though since they'd squandered their stolen funds on luxury lifestyle maintenance, actual victim recovery remained optimistically theoretical. The mercenary she'd hired discovered that I thought it was legitimate security consulting, proved significantly less persuasive to federal juries than their attorneys had optimistically predicted. Their sentences ranged from 5 to 12 years, with the bonus lesson that tactical cosplay doesn't constitute actual authority. But the genuine victory wasn't Vivian's incarceration. It was witnessing our community blossom under leadership that actually served neighbors instead of systematically exploiting them like personal ATM machines. Mrs. Patterson ascended to HOA presidency, bringing librarian organizational excellence and the kind of steel-wrapped in velvet authority that comes from managing teenagers, public resources, and overdue book fines for 4 decades. Rebecca Martinez joined as community outreach coordinator, transforming single mother survival experience into protective advocacy for vulnerable families. Our new HOA implemented what neighbors lovingly called the Blackwood Transparency Revolution: monthly financial reports with independent auditing, live-streamed board meetings archived online, and mandatory federal background checks for leadership positions. Final knowledge nugget: effective HOA governance requires active community oversight and systematic accountability, not blind faith in authority claims. Carmen and I launched the Federal Employee Community Service Initiative, connecting federal law enforcement families with civic engagement opportunities that channeled professional expertise toward neighborhood benefit rather than badge authority. Phoenix developed digital literacy workshops teaching elderly residents and single parents how to research authority claims and document harassment, skills proving valuable far beyond HOA disputes. Community healing involved what Phoenix christened Vivian Recovery Therapy, monthly potluck dinners where neighbors shared survival stories, built genuine relationships, and established support networks that made future exploitation impossible. The intoxicating aromas of dozens of family recipes mixing together, Mrs. Patterson's legendary apple pie, Rebecca's authentic tamales, the Hendricks family's prize-winning chili, created olfactory symphonies representing cooperation that Vivian's toxic presence had never permitted. Property values soared once word spread about our community's resilience, federal employee concentration, and systematic protection against harassment. New families relocated specifically to join a neighborhood renowned for standing together against abuse and maintaining rigorous oversight of leadership authority. Federal agencies adopted our documentation and response methodology as training curriculum for recognizing systematic targeting of federal employees. The Ridgemont Protocol became standard guidance emphasizing community protection, interagency coordination, and systematic evidence preservation rather than isolated individual legal battles. Regional influence expanded when Montana's legislature unanimously passed the Federal Employee Protection Act, elevating systematic harassment of federal employees to state felony status with mandatory minimum sentencing. 5 additional states adopted similar legislation after studying our case documentation and community response methodology. Community transformation knowledge nugget: systematic harassment. Documentation provides foundation for both individual justice and legislative reform protecting future victims nationwide. Our evidence became the cornerstone for policy changes protecting federal families across America. Phoenix earned a full scholarship studying criminal justice and digital forensics, inspired by using technology protecting vulnerable communities from sophisticated predators. She plans specializing in cybercrime investigation, continuing family tradition while adapting it to modern criminal enterprises. Carmen's DEA unit integrated our community engagement techniques for building civilian relationships in areas affected by drug trafficking operations. Apparently, skills that dismantled Vivian's criminal network translate remarkably well against cartels and organized crime syndicates. I expanded FBI community liaison responsibilities, teaching federal employees nationwide how to recognize targeting patterns and respond appropriately without compromising professional ethics or community relationships. 2 years later, our annual Community Protection Day celebrates not merely surviving Vivian's criminal enterprise, but constructing systems preventing future exploitation while honoring federal service members who protect both nation and neighborhood. Every morning, I still savor coffee on our front porch, watching neighbors wave enthusiastically, children playing fearlessly, and elderly residents tending gardens without terror of fraudulent violations. The morning air carries authentic community scents: coffee percolating, bacon sizzling, fresh-baked bread cooling, and the ineffable peace that comes from knowing your neighbors unconditionally support each other. If you've survived HOA harassment, corrupt community leadership, or systematic targeting by authority-abusing predators, share your story in the comments. Community protection requires community awareness and mutual support. Subscribe for more stories where professional training serves community justice and federal employees demonstrate that badges don't separate us from neighbors. They just provide different tools for protecting everyone. Next week, city inspector tried to condemn Marine Veterans Workshop. Didn't know he's the federal building safety expert who actually wrote the inspection code. Sometimes the greatest way to serve your country is serving your neighbors with every skill you've developed protecting both.